Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to MetrObelisk Radio. Today we are looking at The Running Man, the classic movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now this was a little movie that came out in the late 80s, 1987 to be exact, and it's still getting talked about to this very day. So, why does this movie still get talked about to this day? Is it the cast? Is it the narrative? Is it the setting? Or is it a combination of all that stuff? Now, before we get started, if you want to stay up to date on all MetrObelisk Radio episodes, then follow the official blog, metrobeliskradio.blogspot.com. There will be a link in the description on whichever platform you are watching this on. So without further delay, let's tear right into The Running Man. Like with all the retrospectives here, let's start by looking at the creative team. Now, this movie was directed by Paul Michael Glaser. Now, most people might know him as Starsky from the original Starsky and Hutch TV series. Now, he would go on to direct other movies such as The Cutting Edge with D.B. Sweeney and Maura Kelly, The Air Up There with Kevin Bacon, and Kazam with Shaq. After this, he primarily stuck to television and worked on shows like Las Vegas and Criminal Minds. Now, this movie was written by Stephen E. D'Souza. You might not know the name, but you'll know the movies he's done. He's written movies like 48 Hours with Eddie Murphy and Nick Nolte, Commando with Arnold, Die Hard and Hudson Hawk, both starring Bruce Willis, and the Judge Dredd movie starring Sylvester Stallone. Now, this movie was based on the novel written by Stephen King. Stephen King wrote the novel under the pen name Richard Bachman, and Stephen King is most famous as a writer for novels such as It, The Shining, Thinner, Pet Sematary, Misery, The Green Mile, and the short story, The Shawshank Redemption. Now let's tear right into the character analysis portion of this. So we're going to start off with Arnold Schwarzenegger as Ben Richards, the military guy that refused to go along with the plan to kill the rioters in Bakersfield, and he took the blame for it when the media backlash happened. The media staged the incident to look like he shot and killed the 60 people when the other people in the chopper did it. Then we have Maria Conchita Alonso as Amber Mendez. She's the girl who turned in Ben Richards and then discovered the raw footage of the Bakersfield incident. Now, instead of killing her, she was forced into playing the Running Man, and hopefully she would just get killed off there. Then we have Yaphet Kotto as William Laughlin. He assisted with the prison escape in the very beginning of the movie and was forced to play the Running Man. The entire time, he's looking to help the resistance any which way he can. Then we have Marvin J. McIntyre as Harold Weiss, the same as William Laughlin, but he found the satellite decoder sequence and gave that to Amber before he was ultimately killed by Dynamo in the movie. And finally, we have Richard Dawson as Damon Killian, the host of The Running Man. At least this movie got a game show host to play a game show host. Before this movie, yeah, he was on Hogan's Heroes, but most people will remember him from two things. The first thing is being a regular on Match Game. And number two is the host of Family Feud. Yes, he was the very first host. Richard Dawson is basically playing himself in this movie. Now let's move on to the actual narrative analysis portion of this. Now this movie definitely has a cyberpunk setting. It's set in the magical year of 2017. Now keep in mind the movie was released in 1987, so it would have been 30 years later back then. The world economy in this movie has collapsed. Food, natural resources, and oil are in short supply. That leads to a police state that basically is divided into paramilitary zones. Television is controlled by the state, similar to the likes of the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, and the game show The Running Man has become the most popular show in history. All art, music, and communications are censored, and dissent isn't tolerated. There is a small resistance movement, but it's underground. The filmmakers are saying in the opening that they're only showing The Running Man, the most popular reality competition in this world, to keep the population quiet, and when that doesn't work, well, you get the picture. This movie just starts out with Ben Richards wanting to escape to stumbling upon the underground resistance movement to thwart the authoritarians. That's pretty much what this movie is in a nutshell narrative-wise. And yes, this movie is filled with Arnold one-liners. Sub-Zero is now just plain Zero. What a hothead. What happened to Buzzsaw? He had to split. But what did this movie effectively do? Why is this movie still getting watched and talked about 30 plus years later, like I alluded to in the intro? It's because it predicted the rise of reality TV, and more specifically, the popularity of shows like Survivor. Now, back in the 1980s, the closest thing to reality TV was Family Feud, Press Your Luck, the $25,000 Pyramid, Password, etc. All of these game shows. Now, this movie would go on to inspire the show American Gladiators, and it had the same setup as The Running Man had, where you have runners take on, in this instance, gladiators at various tasks and obstacles. The biggest difference with The Running Man and American Gladiators is in American Gladiators, no one was trying to kill each other. To get back to reality TV, and specifically Survivor, this movie even predicted the editing that would be used to get the crowd to either love or hate somebody. In this movie, you see the quote-unquote made-for-TV version of Ben Richards' Bakersfield incident. I can compare this to a modern example, which is probably a first on this show, and that was the 39th season of Survivor Island of the Idols. This was the season where you had the guy who couldn't keep his hands to himself, so they say. If you watch that merge episode that season where they show it, you can see in the editing that production was really going out of their way to paint that guy into a corner that he simply couldn't get out of no matter how hard he tried. And according to the cast, and even the person who was casted that bad into the light had no idea who or what production was referring to when they interfered at the time. Then when you see the three quote-unquote winners from the prior year's Running Man sitting in Maui, but in reality they were all dead, this puts into perspective on how some of these reality shows, the winners essentially get screwed. A perfect example of this is The Apprentice. On the very first season of The Apprentice, I believe that if you won, you were supposed to get $250,000 to start your own enterprise, but what did the winner of the first season get? You guessed it, bragging rights that they won The Apprentice. They never got the money. Another example would be The Bachelor. Now this one is twofold. The first is you don't get paid for being on The Bachelor, a little unknown fact. And the second thing is, of those winners who won the girl in the end, how many of those relationships genuinely lasted? Now, this movie has the standard Hollywood ending where they expose the show's dirty secrets on TV, and Ben Richards comes back from the dead to kill Killian. In reality, the Running Man game show would probably survive in this world because all you have to do is get a production change and market that to the fullest extent, and then hey, we've won the goodwill back with all the people. Yay! Now, how was the Running Man received? Now, I can only speak for what modern audiences think of the movie, since sites like Rotten Tomatoes, Metacritic, and IMDb didn't exist back in 1987. Now, this movie has a critic score of 63% on Rotten Tomatoes out of 41 critic reviews, and an audience score of 60% out of 80,798 audience reviews. It has a Metacritic score of 45 based on 12 critic reviews, and a user score of 7 out of 10 based on 27 ratings. And this movie sits on IMDb at a 6.7 out of 10 based on 136,979 reviews. Now, this movie was made on a budget of $27 million back in 1987. Now, if we adjust that budget for inflation in 2020 dollars, that would be a budget of $60,937,526.41. And the movie grossed $38,122,105 back in 87. Again, let's adjust that for inflation in 2020 dollars. That would be $86,039,510.38 in today's money as of the recording of this episode. Now, this movie didn't even make its budget back in 1987, yet it still gets talked about to this day. So now to end this episode off with some final thoughts. What people will often say to say that this movie hasn't aged well is, oh, well, you see, this movie predicted that reality TV shows would be in an arena, and Survivor wasn't in an arena, The Apprentice wasn't in an arena, The Bachelor wasn't in an arena. What I have to say to that is, you have to remember that back in the late 80s, there was no frame of reference outside of Family Feud and Press Your Luck as the reality TV shows of their day. Who knew that Survivor would go on to be the biggest show of the early 2000s? Oh wait, this movie was made 13 years before Survivor Borneo premiered on CBS. Maybe this movie didn't get their prediction right on the nose, but you can say that this movie predicted the popularity of reality TV and what lengths that reality TV producers will go through to make someone likable or hated by the audience. Maybe not every reality TV game show turned out to be American Gladiators, but there were a lot of clones of that show back in the 90s. Nickelodeon's Guts and Legends of the Hidden Temple are the first to come to my mind. But even in the 2000s, when reality TV just exploded, not every reality TV game show was Survivor. Again, there were a lot of Survivor clones, but none of them really lasted with the exception of Big Brother. And I'll end the episode off with this. Without this movie being in existence, the Hunger Games wouldn't have happened because there would have been nothing for Suzanne Collins to blatantly rip off, even down to the backstory of the world. The only difference between the world of the Running Man and the world of the Hunger Games is instead of paramilitary zones being used, they're known as districts in the Hunger Games. And there's another movie that Hunger Games ripped off blatantly that I'll get to later called Battle Royale. In closing, the Running Man predicted a trend, the Hunger Games followed a trend.